My name's Brian Kirby. I'm a professor of English here at the Rio Grande campus at El Paso Community College. My first year on hopefully a very long journey with the college.
How did you like your first year?
Loved it. It's fascinating here. The students are amazing. The commitment level is unlike anything I've ever seen from students. I've taught all around the Southwest, and the students, particularly at the Rio Grande campus, have a level of commitment that's unmatched.
What places have you taught?
University of New Mexico, University of Texas El Paso, the College of Southern Nevada, the University of Nevada Las Vegas, Doñana Community College, and my institution where I graduated from, New Mexico State University.
What is it about the Southwest and maybe your literary journey through that area?
You know, that it's my family is from Minnesota and South Dakota mostly, and I was born in Colorado, in Boulder, and moved here when my family moved here when I was like less than 2 years old. So I grew up in Las Cruces in the desert, and have always maintained I'm a desert rat. And I've always moved away and always come back because there's something magical about the desert. And it's not, the more I think about it, it's not the desert, it's the people. There's something about the people in this area that is unlike anywhere around this country or around the world. There's something about the border that has people welcoming and for the most part non-judgmental. You aren't judged for what you drive or what shoes you're wearing or how, if you're in step with the latest fashion. People accept you for you, and they want to get to know you. And there's something really cool about the desert that if the rest of the country were a little bit open-minded about accepting people in the desert, they would find it just as magical as I do.
As a teacher of English, how does your surroundings kind of influence you on the way you teach or what you teach, or do you usually use a lot of, what kind of genres do you use in your environment? How do you mix that together?
Well, you know, I grew up in Las Cruces, like I said, and went to public schools there and endured my English classes and things like Gulliver's Travels and The Red Badge of Courage and all of those really off-putting genres. For me anyway, when I was a 16, 17-year-old kid. And so I always kept literature at an arm's length because it wasn't appealing to me, right? And back then, for me, my three interests were like basketball, girls, and maintaining my acne, right? And so from that early experience and then some early experiences in my college English classes, I learned how to teach based on those because I don't ever want to be bored as a student or as a teacher. And so that's, you know, what informs me is what interests me. And what I teach is hopefully a student can never say, this is boring, because that would be indirectly telling me, you're boring, right? And so as far as influences and the surroundings, like, I grew up with this notion that literature and the great books were written by people from across the pond in Europe, and that the great writers are, you know, far away. And so I remember one day walking into our local bookstore, Coas bookstores in Las Cruces, and just randomly picking up a book and opening it up and started reading it, and it immediately spoke to me. And it was written by a guy named Lee K. Abbott, and he's from Las Cruces and from the Deming, Las Cruces area. And he was writing about that area. And he was writing, and like I saw streets names that I recognized, and I was like, "This, wow!" And I looked at the back of the book, and I looked at all the praise coming from, you know, New York Times, and, you know, all of these big names saying this book has the stuff of literature. It has the grit and the grime of literature. This is great reading. This will be considered the classics, part of the classics. And it was like, wow, literature can take place right here.
What other authors influenced you?
Well, when we were in high school, everybody, caught the Catcher in the Rye bug, and J.D. Salinger wrote in a way that was like so conversational between you and the page. And so that was like one of the first books that was like I could read cover to cover in a sitting because of his writing style. He made it seem so easy. And then as I got older, I realized there was more than Salinger. And then in my graduate school studies, we were turned on to a guy named Dagoberto Gil, who was an El Pasoan. And again, he wrote in a way that was so conversational, and that voice was so El Paso, Las Cruces. And then there was a guy named Don Kurtz, who was a great writer in Las Cruces. Robert Boswell, Antonia Nelson, Kevin McElvoy were all great writers who were also happened to be my teachers. And so that had a profound impact. And again, like a lot of people in this area, or they grow up thinking that literature is in New York or in Chicago, but literature is right here in the Sun City.
What is your personal writing about? Like, what genre would you say your personal writing is? How do you like to express yourself?
It's I got my master's degree in creative writing, and my thesis was a novella, which is a short novel, and short stories, which was fiction. And that took so much out of me so many years ago, putting together that 115-page collection. And I've tried to write fiction since then, but I find now I've transitioned into more nonfiction. And because I've been teaching essay writing for freshman composition classes for so long, initially when I started teaching, I didn't know how to do that. And I remember one of the first times I was at the board and I was writing the word argument, and I was like, am I spelling this correctly? And so from teaching, I learned. And I think a lot of teachers who are as self-aware as I realize that when we're teaching, there's a lot of learning going on. And so I started to really appreciate essay writing. And so a lot of what I write these days is persuasive and very conversational. And I think that the social media is giving us opportunities to write, but in much smaller chunks. Twitter only allows us 140 characters, and there used to be a time when Facebook only allowed 400. Or no, Twitter was 140 and Facebook was 420. And like I found it really interesting and immediately gratifying when I could write something that had an immediate impact when somebody would click like or thumbs up or whatever. And so I find I get a lot of interesting writing done in those forms, and then I have found that I can cut and paste a lot of that stuff and create longer works. But it was a happy accident to discover that those social networks allowed me to write, and I didn't realize it until I started cutting and pasting and creating longer works.
If you could just reach like maybe one student that just thought like you did, thought that things were so far away from him or her, what was something what's the one book that you would give them to kind of let them know that this world isn't as big as they think it is, and maybe a little bit more accessible? What would you say is the best book to mention?
Oh, wow. Lee K. Abbott's works are very interesting. There's a writer named Mary Gateskill who, because, a lot of writers tend to write, they get pigeonholed, like men, for a lot of young female students, they may not hold the same appeal. And Mary Gateskill, I think, widens the gap. Like, she has a much wider appeal. A lot of her stuff might be considered racy or R-rated, but it's very interesting stuff, and it's very smart stuff. If you've ever seen the movie Secretary, a lot of people, cite that as like a transformative movie in their lives, but for all the wrong reasons, because that movie is not what her short story was about. If you ever read her short story, you'd realize that the movie really did something afoul with her works. But Mary Gateskill is a very talented, very philosophical writer, and again, a lot of people who read her stuff walk away from it a lot smarter than when they started it, and don't really realize it until they go, wow, I just learned a whole bunch of philosophy that was draped in a short story.
Did you have anything to add? Like,
you know, I think a lot of literature takes place in more forms than just the book, and TV writing has actually turned it in a way that is a good thing. If you pay attention to works like The Sopranos or The Wire or even Breaking Bad, Breaking Bad is rooted a lot in Walt Whitman, and Walt Whitman's works is one of the cornerstones of Breaking Bad. But those writers are so smart, and like there's a very overt Walt Whitman plot point in Breaking Bad in the series. But there's also like a lot of Whitman going on in the subtext that television is now giving us the opportunity for real study, for real rigorous academic study, rather than, you know, like the Three's Company, Gilligan's Island generation of television. Television is now has some of the best writing that's out there.